Good evening. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Monday, Yom Rishon, and happy President's Day. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house on a Monday? Yehud in South Carolina, Melissa in Great Neck Guy in Ohio, Bill in very cold mid-Missouri, Shandor in the Bronx, Lucy in Minnesota, Paul in the Great Northwest, Renee in Indiana, Belle in cold Texas, Am Yisrael Chai, pray for the hostages, Amen. Bella in Florida, Joe in the Inland Empire, Renee 17 degrees Fahrenheit, Bloomington, wow. Karen in Northern California, Tom in PA, Yosef in Nevada, Gail in very cold Kansas City, James Roth, so good to see you in Indianapolis, Marjorie in Georgia, Spencer in Connecticut, Ella in Southern California, Alan in New York City. Welcome, everybody. Quick administrative note, Nina and I are headed with our movie Guns N' Moses to the Atlanta Jewish Film Festival this coming weekend, which necessitates travel and some days off from the class. So no class Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. Just fall further behind, but this was to be expected. Just no way around it. Will not be able to teach while traveling on the road with the film. But we will make it up. We will make it up. Not in Tractate Sanhedrin where the pages are long, deep, and involved. But Tractate Makos coming up has shorter dafs. We'll make it up as we always do and get back on track. But so we'll have class today and tomorrow and Wednesday. And then we'll be off until the following Tuesday because we're traveling to Atlanta. If you're in the Atlanta area, would love to see you at the Atlanta Jewish Film Festival. Our first film, which became a cult classic, When Do We Eat? The Passover comedy, is playing Saturday night at that festival. And then Guns N' Moses, our new movie, has 3 screenings actually on Sunday at the festival. Lots going on with the movie, more announcements coming soon. All right, let's get to our daf today. I'm just going to say at the outset, we're going to be covering some sensitive material today. I'm not a rabbi. I don't make the laws. God wrote the Torah, dictated it to Moses. Moses gave it to the Jewish people and the world. Our sages, have given the commentary to help us understand and how to apply those eternal and unchanging laws. And they're not always what the modern ear enjoys hearing, let's say. So I'm just going to report to you what's in the text as our sages bring it down from the Torah. It's just interpreting verses that are available in any Bible in the world. Okay, page 54a, continuing our discussion of Mishna number 5 here in chapter 7 of Tractate Sanhedrin, the 24th volume of the Talmud. Picking this up a little bit, fairly close to the top of page 54a. Now, a Baraisa asks, we have learned the punishment for one who engages in intercourse with his father's wife. From where is the prohibition against doing this act derived? Right? There are separate verses, for example, bestiality, which we're going to be talking about today. There are separate verses in the Torah, one which prohibits the act, and a different verse which records what is the punishment for that act. So just because the Torah spells out a punishment for something doesn't mean that that is the only verse in the Torah from where we could derive that it is prohibited. In fact, the Torah is explicit about certain prohibited acts, that it is prohibited, and in a separate passage, and this is what the punishment is if you do that, if you violate that prohibition intentionally. And of course, it would only apply if there were witnesses there who warned you and you did it anyway immediately after the warning and they testified, etc. And when we're talking about death penalty offenses, so there hasn't been a rabbinic court that imposed a death penalty according to halacha since before the Second Temple was destroyed almost 2,000 years ago. So the rabbinic courts do not impose the death penalty. This is more that we're learning what the law is, what it would be, not so much the practical application thereof. Okay, so we have learned the punishment for one who engages in intercourse with his father's wife. From where do we learn that this is in fact prohibited? So the Brisa answers that the verse states in Leviticus 18:7, the nakedness of your father and the nakedness of your mother you shall not uncover. And the phrase, the nakedness of your father, this is referring to your father's wife. Now this Brisa asks, do you say that the reference is to your father's wife? Or is it rather referring to the actual nakedness of your father? In other words, to the prohibition on having homosexual intercourse with your father, right? Homosexual incest. So the Brisa answers, it is stated here, the nakedness of your father you shall not uncover, and it is stated there in the verse that describes the punishment, and the man who lies with his father's wife, he has uncovered his father's nakedness. That's Leviticus 20:11. So, just as there the verse is speaking of marriage, i.e. it is not referring to the father himself, but to his wife, so too here the verse is speaking of marriage, i.e. to his father's wife. Right? So this is where you learn both that the prohibition in one verse and the punishment in the other, and they're both referring to a man who sleeps with his father's wife. And we've already said that there could be two different cases of that, where that woman is his mother, in which case would be a further prohibition, or if it's his stepmother, which is also prohibited, but not the same way. And the verse indicates that one's father's wife is forbidden to him, whether she is his father's wife who is his mother, or whether she is his father's wife who is not his mother. From where is it derived that she is forbidden to him in a case where she is his mother who is not his father's wife? That's just plain incest with the mother. So the verse states, the nakedness of your mother you shall not uncover, at Leviticus 18:7. Now the Brisa asks, I have derived only with regard to the prohibition that the verse renders the law of his mother who is not his father's wife like the law of his mother who is his father's wife. But with regard to the punishment, from where do I derive that they share the same law? And the Brisa answers, expounding on the verbal analogy that it mentioned earlier. It is stated here in the verse that describes the prohibition, quote, the nakedness of your father you shall not uncover, at Leviticus 18:7. And it is stated there in the verse that describes the punishment, he has uncovered his father's nakedness, in Leviticus 20:11. So it is derived from this verbal analogy that just as with regard to the prohibition, the verse renders his mother who is not his father's wife like his mother who is his father's wife, meaning that both are forbidden, so too with regard to the punishment. The verse renders his mother who is not his father's wife like his mother who is his father's wife. It is derived from the phrase, she is your mother, in Leviticus 18:7, that you render him liable due to the prohibition against engaging in intercourse with his mother. But you do not render him liable due to the prohibition against engaging in intercourse with his father's wife. So the Brisa ends there. Since the laws in the collection of Barisas where this Brisa appears, which is known as Torah's Kohanim, are in accordance with the opinions of Rabbi Yehuda, the Brisa supports the opinion of Rava, who explains the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda in this manner, which is how we got here. Now the Gemara discusses the Brisa, asking, and how do the rabbis who disagree with Rabbi Yehuda interpret the phrase, the nakedness of your father? So the Gemara answers, they hold that this phrase is meant literally, i.e. that it is referring to homosexual intercourse. They do not accept the verbal analogy from which Rabbi Yehuda derives that the reference is to intercourse with one's father's wife. So the Gemara asks, isn't this prohibition against homosexual intercourse with one's father derived from the verse Leviticus 18:22, which prohibits homosexual intercourse, where it says, and you shall not lie with a male as with a woman. It is an abomination. So the Gemara answers, the prohibition is stated specifically with regard to one's father in order to render him liable to bring two sin offerings for unwittingly engaging in intercourse with his father. And it is in accordance with the statement of Rabbi Yehuda As Rav Yehuda says, a Gentile who engages in intercourse with his father is liable for committing two transgressions. Likewise, one who engages in intercourse with his father's brother is liable for committing two transgressions. So Ravis, in other words, there's a prohibition on homosexual intercourse and there's a prohibition on incest. And so even though the same act violates both laws, you could say that there are two prohibitions involved. Now, Rava says it stands to reason that the statement of Rav Yehuda is with regard to a Jew who does this unwittingly. Now, unwittingly, when you're talking about in this situation, it could either mean that a person doesn't know it's prohibited when he does it, or it could mean that he somehow did it accidentally, not meaning to do it, but not with intention. And the statement that he is liable for committing two transgressions concerns his liability to bring an offering, right? Sin offerings are only brought when somebody does what transgresses a prohibition in the Torah unwittingly. If he does it intentionally, the sin offering doesn't apply. There's other ways to atone, but one of them is not by bringing a sin offering if the transgression was performed intentionally. Sin offerings are only for unwitting transgressions. And the statement that he is liable for committing two transgressions concerns his liability to bring an offering, i.e. he is liable to bring two sin offerings. And even though the fact remains that he said Gentile, it is a euphemism, as he did not want to attribute such a sin to a Jew, as if it enters your mind that this reference is literally to a Gentile, the statement that he is liable for committing two transgressions is meaningless. What is his punishment for such a transgression? It is death. Could you kill him twice? Rather, it must be referring to a Jew who acted unwittingly. For intentional transgressions, right, the death penalty applies. So this law is also taught in a baraisa. One who engages in intercourse with his father is liable for committing two transgressions. One who engages in intercourse with his father's brother, with his uncle, is liable for committing two transgressions. As it is stated, you shall not uncover the nakedness of your father's brother. Does that mean you shall not have sex with your uncle? Or does that mean you shall not have sex with your uncle's wife? That's what they're arguing here. Some say that this is not in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, as in his opinion, there is no special prohibition against homosexual intercourse with one's father. He interprets the verse, the nakedness of your father you shall not uncover, as referring to one's father's wife. So accordingly, one who engages in homosexual intercourse with his father or with his father's brother is liable only due to the general prohibition against homosexual intercourse, but this is not what the law against uncovering the nakedness of your father or your uncle is speaking about. And that's why there would only be one transgression and not two. Again, it's all prohibited, but if you did it unwittingly, are you liable to bring one sin offering or two would be the practical difference here. And some say, you may even say that the Baraisa is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, and that he derives that there is a specific prohibition against homosexual intercourse with one's father by a kal v'chomer inference from the prohibition concerning one's father's brother. And the inference goes like this. If for intercourse with one's father's brother, who is merely his father's relative, one is liable for committing two transgressions, then for intercourse with his father, is it not clear all the more so that he should be liable for committing two transgressions? And the sages who provide these two interpretations of Rabbi Yehuda's opinion disagree with regard to the issue that is the subject of the dispute between Abaye and Rava. One sage, he of the second interpretation, holds that one administers punishment based on a kal v'chomer inference. Even with regard to the prohibition that is derived kal v'chomer, one who transgresses it is liable. And the other sage, he of the first interpretations, holds that one does not administer punishment based on a kal v'chomer inference, right? The kal v'chomer, meaning if we rule this way, if we rule stringently in a case that is relatively lenient, then for a transgression that is more severe, all the more so, we would rule severely, right? Stringently. or if we are ruling leniently in a case that is of moderate severity, then all the more so we would rule leniently in a case where the transgression is less severe than in the first case, right? That's the kal v'chomer type of rabbinic biblical interpretation. So here they're saying that in terms of deriving laws based on kal v'chomer inferences, we're not going to apply punishment for a law derived that way. And another view is that we are. The Gemara asks, and with regard to the rabbis who disagree with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, from where do they derive the prohibition of intercourse with one's father's wife, right, with his stepmother, or his mother, if it's his mother who's his father's wife? And the Gemara answers, they derive it from the verse, the nakedness of your father's wife you shall not uncover. It is your father's nakedness, Leviticus 18:8. Now the Gemara asks, and what does Rabbi Yehuda derive from this verse, since he derives the prohibition from the verse, the nakedness of your father you shall not uncover? Sounds like this verse speaks to that issue more directly. Why is Rabbi Yehuda deriving it from a different place? What's he going to derive from this verse? What does Rabbi Yehuda derive from this verse, since he derives the prohibition from the other verse, the nakedness of your father you shall not uncover? And the Gemara answers, that verse is necessary for the prohibition of one's father's wife after his father's death. Even though his father is dead, his father's wife remains forbidden to him, right? So if your father, this could actually happen in the real world, right? It's not so far-fetched that a father has a second wife who's much younger than him, and then the father dies. And then his son somehow, sparks a relationship with his stepmother, who's now his father's widow. Could they have a relationship? No, that's prohibited. Even after his father dies, it is prohibited for him to have a relationship with his father's wife, who now his widow. The Gemara asks, and from where do the rabbis derive this law? And the Gemara answers, that law is derived from the last clause of the verse, it is your father's nakedness. So then the Gemara asks, so what does Rabbi Yehuda derive from that clause? And that, according to Rabbi Yehuda, that clause is necessary to teach the law that if one engages in intercourse with his father's wife, you render him liable due to the prohibition against engaging in intercourse with his father's wife. But you do not render him liable due to the prohibition against engaging in intercourse with a married woman, which is a separate prohibition. The Gemara asks, but didn't we learn in the Mishna, one who engages in intercourse with his father's wife is liable to bring two offerings. One due to the fact that she is his father's wife, and one due to the fact of former prohibition, both during his father's lifetime and after his father's death. And the Gemara notes, and Rabbi Yehuda does not dispute this. So how can it be suggested that in Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, one who engages in intercourse with his father's wife is not liable for engaging in intercourse with a married woman? Abaye says he disputes this ruling in a Baraisa. Although it is not mentioned in the Mishnah that Rabbi Yehuda disputes this ruling, it is mentioned in a different source. The Gemara asks, and as for the rabbis who disagree with Rabbi Yehuda, from where do they derive the punishment for one who engages in intercourse with his father's wife after his father's death? Granted, according to Rabbi Yehuda, it is derived by means of a verbal analogy. But from where do the rabbis who do not accept the verbal analogy derive this prohibition? And the Gemara answers, the rabbis can say to you that it is derived as follows. With regard to that phrase, he has uncovered his father's nakedness, from which Rabbi Yehuda derives his verbal analogy. The rabbis derive it from the punishment for one who engages in intercourse with his father's wife after his father's death. And the Gemara asks for the rabbis, from where do they derive the punishment for one who engages in intercourse with his mother who is not his father's wife, which now you would need to derive from somewhere else. And Rav Shesha, the son of Rav Idi, says, the verse states, she is your mother, Leviticus 18:7. The verse renders the law of his mother, who is not his father's wife, just like the law of his mother, who is his father's wife. And the Mishnah teaches, with regard to one who engages in intercourse with his daughter-in-law, that he is liable both due to the fact that she is his daughter-in-law and due to the fact that she is a married woman, two transgressions. The Gemara asks, and let him also be liable due to engaging in intercourse with his son's wife. As it is stated in the verse, you shall not uncover the nakedness of your daughter-in-law. She is your son's wife. You shall not uncover her nakedness. Leviticus 18:15. And Abaye says, the verse begins with his daughter-in-law and ends with his son's wife, to tell you that these are not two separate prohibitions. Rather, his daughter-in-law is his son's wife. They are one and the same prohibition. So you would have two transgressions, one for lying with his daughter-in-law and another for lying with a married woman. But you wouldn't have three transgressions, one for his daughter-in-law and one for the wife of his son. That's the same. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 5 here in chapter 7 of Tractate Sanhedrin. Okay, Mishnah number 6. I'm just the messenger. I'm just giving over what it says here, and the sages of the Gemara are giving over what it says explicitly in the Torah. Mishnah number 6. A man who engages in intercourse with a male or with an animal, and the woman who engages in intercourse with an animal, are executed by stoning. Obviously, this would only happen if the witnesses warned them and the persons did it anyway, right after the warning, etc. But what is the halachic penalty that is associated with this act? It's this. Now, the animal is likewise stoned to death. The Mishnah asks, if the person sinned by doing this, how did the animal sin? Rather, because a calamity was caused to a person by the animal, therefore the verse states that the animal should be stoned so that it does not cause another person to sin. Alternatively, it is so that this animal will not pass through the marketplace, and those who see it will say, oh, this is the animal because of which so-and-so was stoned to death, and its existence would shame that person's memory, who was already, executed for the crime. No need to visit further shame or degradation on that person or the family. That's Mishnah number 6. Now the Gemara. From where do we derive the prohibition and punishment for homosexual intercourse with a male? It is as the sages taught in a Baraisa with regard to the verse, quote, and if a man lies with a male as with a woman, both of them have committed an abomination, they shall be put to death, their blood shall be upon them. Leviticus 20, verse 13. As I told you before, these verses come in pairs. There's one verse for the prohibition on that action and a different verse for the punishment. This is the verse for the punishment on homosexual acts. The verse for the prohibition, we read it before and we'll read it again, is Leviticus 18:22. Now, in Leviticus 20:13, the word man excludes a minor boy. So the phrase lies with a male, this is referring to any male, whether he's an adult man or whether he is a minor boy. So therefore, if a man has sex with another man, whichever role they take, they're both subject to this prohibition and this punishment. If a man has sex with a boy, the boy is exempt from punishment. He didn't do anything, he was raped. The phrase lies with a male, the phrase as with a woman, right, where it says if a man lies with a male as with a woman. So the phrase as with a woman, in Hebrew, mishkeve isha, this is referring to lying with a woman, and it appears in the plural, mishkeve, the lyings of a woman, right? So why is it in the plural? We're not talking about women, it's a singular woman, but the verb is plural. And what does this teach? This verse teaches you that there are two manners of lying with a woman, for which one who engages in intercourse with a woman who is forbidden to him is punished. Vaginal and anal intercourse. In other words, if a man commits adultery with a married woman, whether it was vaginal intercourse or anal intercourse, they would be guilty of adultery. They don't have the excuse that if there was no vaginal intercourse, that it wasn't adultery. It would be adultery. Rabbi Yishmael says, this phrase is written to come to teach about the punishment for homosexual intercourse, and the law that one is liable for anal intercourse with a woman who is forbidden to him is found to be derived from it. The phrase, they shall be put to death, is referring to execution by stoning. Do you say that they are executed by stoning, or is it rather by one of all the other types of death penalty that are stated in the Torah? How do we know that this punishment is stoning? It is stated here, their blood shall be upon them, And it is stated with regard to a necromancer and a sorcerer, their blood shall be upon them in Leviticus 20:27. So just as there the verse states that a necromancer and a sorcerer are executed by stoning, so too here they are executed by stoning. Now we're on page 54b. We have learned the punishment for homosexual intercourse, but from where is the prohibition on this action derived? The verse states, quote, "And you shall not lie with a male as with a woman, it is an abomination." That's Leviticus 18:22. How this applies, how we understand this in the modern world, way above my pay grade. I'm just reporting what it says here. I will note in passing, that for rabbis who are qualified and are looking into the nuance of these laws, if you just look at the precise language, there's some interesting nuances here, right? It doesn't say, "And you shall not lie with a man as with a woman. It is an abomination." It says, "You shall not lie with a male," as opposed to female. "You shall not lie with a male as with a woman," right? So if it was parallel language, it would have said, "And you shall not lie with a male as with a female," or "And you shall not lie with a man as with a woman." But in fact, it says zachar for male and isha for woman. And that's why it says, "You shall not lie with a male as with a woman." What can we learn out from that? I leave that to the sages. I suspect that a gay man would say, he doesn't lie with a man as he would with a woman. And perhaps there's a distinction here, between somebody who this has been his orientation from birth, and somebody who's just some kind of a pleasure seeker. And we see examples of that in the ancient world outside the Jewish world. And perhaps, this also speaks to the idea that, I don't know that much about Greek history, but I have heard, right, that married men who are happy family men were also doing homosexual stuff, and somehow that was just accepted by society and wasn't considered cheating on their wives. So this would say, yeah, no, you can't do that. I've never read any classical Torah commentary that says that. Just heard it in a conversation. I'm just offering what's on the page. Okay. We have learned from here the prohibition for the one who engages in homosexual intercourse actively, the one who does the penetrating. From where do we derive the prohibition for one who engages in homosexual intercourse passively, right? The one who is penetrated. The verse states, "There shall not be a Kadesh among the children of Israel." At Deuteronomy 23:18. What is this word Kadesh? Very interesting word. Same letters as Kadosh or Kiddush, holiness, right? Kadesh sometimes can refer to a prostitute, or it can refer to just matters of profanity, of unholiness, right? Of something that profanes holiness. So here it's translated as sodomite, but the term is Kadesh. Okay, so there shall not be a Kadesh among the children of Israel. And another verse cited to clarify the meaning of the term Kadesh states in 1 Kings 14:24, "And there were also Kadesh in the land, and they did according to the abominations of the nations which the Lord drove out before the children of Israel." This is the statement of Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Kiva says it is not necessary to derive this law from the verse, "There shall not be a Kadesh." Rather, it says, "And you shall not lie, tishkav, with a male as with a woman." So read into the verse, "You shall not enable your being lain with," right? In other words, tishkav includes the other verb syntax, tishakev. You shall not lie with a male, and you shall not be lain with a male. Both are prohibited. The Gemara asks, from where do we derive that one who engages in intercourse with an animal is liable to receive capital punishment? It is as the sages taught, "And if a man lies with an animal, he shall be put to death, and you shall kill the animal." The word man excludes a minor boy. The phrase lies with an animal is referring to any animal, whether old or young. Right? So if a boy does this, he's a minor, he's not going to be subject to this penalty. But if the animal is young or old, it makes no difference. The phrase shall be put to death, this refers to execution by stoning. Do you say that they are executed by stoning for this transgression of bestiality? Or is it rather by one of all the other types of death penalty that are stated in the Torah? It is stated here, you shall kill, and it is stated there with regard to an inciter, but you shall kill him, and you shall stone him with stones, and he shall die. So just as there, the verse states that an inciter is executed by stoning, so too here, one who engages in bestiality is executed by stoning. We have learned the punishment for one who engages in bestiality actively. From where do we derive the punishment for one who engages in bestiality passively, right? The receiving end of sex with an animal. The verse states, whoever lies with an animal shall be put to death at Exodus 22:18. If this verse is not needed for the matter of one who actively lies with an animal, i.e. a male who sexually penetrates an animal, apply it to the matter of one who causes an animal to lie with him. By being penetrated by the animal, i.e. any type of intercourse with an animal, is punishable by death. We have therefore learned the punishment for both one who engages in bestiality actively and one who engages in bestiality passively. But from where is the prohibition derived? Again, there's the punishment verse and the prohibition verse. So the verse states, and you shall not lie with any animal to defile yourself with it. Leviticus 18:23. We have learned the prohibition for one who engages in bestiality actively. From where do we derive the prohibition, as opposed to the punishment? The prohibition for one who engages in bestiality passively. The verse states, there shall not be a Kadesh among the children of Israel. And another verse states, and there were also Kadesh in the land, which shows that anyone who engages in intercourse in a way that is like the abominations of the nations that God drove out of the promised land because of their abominations and then gave the land to the children of Israel, this is prohibited. This is the statement of Rabbi Yishmael, right? Kadesh in the land, the abominations of those nations that were driven out included child sacrifice and these prohibited sexual practices. This is the statement of Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Akiva says it is not necessary to derive the law prohibiting passively engaging in bestiality from this verse. Rather, it says, you shall not lie, shechovtecha, which can be read as follows, you shall not enable your being lain with, right? Same as Rabbi Akiva before said, you can't be on the active end or the receiving end for the homosexual prohibition. He does the same thing with the syntax of the verb here in the prohibition on relating with an animal. The Gemara discusses cases to which these halakhic expositions are relevant. Now, what is the law of one who unwittingly engages in intercourse with a male and unwittingly causes a male to engage in intercourse with him within one lapse of awareness, i.e., without realizing in the interim that these behaviors are forbidden? Is he considered to have transgressed two separate prohibitions and therefore liable to bring two sin offerings? Or is he considered to have transgressed one prohibition twice and liable to bring only one sin offering? Do we consider the active end and the receiving end two separate transgressions if they were in one lapse of awareness, or is he just violating the same prohibition? Rabbi Abahu says, according to the statement of Rabbi Yishmael, he is liable for transgressing two different prohibitions. One is derived from the verse, you shall not lie, and the other one is derived from the verse, there shall not be a Kadesh among you. So these are two separate prohibitions, and that's why it would be two different transgressions. But according to the statement of Rabbi Akiva, he is liable for only one prohibition, as the prohibitions of you shall not lie and you shall not be lain with, tishkav and tishakev, are one statement in the verse. And we actually hold by Rabbi Akiva on this. Similarly, with regard to one who unwittingly engages in intercourse with an animal and then unwittingly causes an animal to engage in intercourse with him within one lapse of awareness, Rabbi Abahu says, according to the statement of Rabbi Yishmael, he is liable for transgressing two different prohibitions. One is derived from you shall not lie, and the other one, there shall not be a Kadesh. But according to the statement of Rabbi Akiva, he is liable for only one prohibition, as the prohibitions of you shall not lie and you shall not be lain with are one and the same, come from the same verse, and so one transgression only, and we hold like Rabbi Akiva. Abaye says, even according to the statement of Rabbi Yishmael, he is liable for only one prohibition. As when it is written, there shall not be a kadesh, it is written only with regard to intercourse with men, but not with regard to bestiality. And the Gemara asks, but according to Abaye, from where does Rabbi Yishmael derive the prohibition for one who engages in bestiality passively, on the receiving end? The Gemara answers, he derives it from the verse, whoever lies with an animal shall be put to death. If this verse is not needed for the matter of the one who actively lies with the animal, apply it to the matter of one who causes the animal to lie with him. And it is derived from the fact that the merciful one expresses the law of one who engages in bestiality passively, using the term of one who engages in it actively. Just as with regard to one who engages in bestiality actively, the Torah punishes both for his action and prohibits it too. With regard to one who engages in bestiality passively, the Torah also has a verse for punishing the action and a verse for prohibiting it. With regard to the case of one who has unwittingly, with regard to the case of one who was unwittingly sodomized by a male, and then unwittingly was one with whom an animal copulated, all within one lapse of awareness. Right now, we've said that these transgressions are spoken about in the same area of the Torah, and that active and passive, only result in one transgression, according to Rabbi Akiva. Okay, well, what if within one lapse of awareness he violated? Now, these really are separate prohibitions: one for homosexuality and one for bestiality. It was all done in one lapse of awareness. But could we say that this is not one? That this is only one transgression and not two? Rabbi Abahu says that according to the statement of Rabbi Akiva, even according to Rabbi Akiva, he is liable for transgressing two prohibitions. One is derived from the verse, you shall not lie with a male, and the other one is derived from the verse, you shall not lie with an animal. According to the statement of Rabbi Yishmael, he is liable for transgressing only one prohibition, as both this prohibition and that prohibition are derived from the verse, there shall not be a kadesh among you. So Abaye says, even according to the statement of Rabbi Yishmael, he is liable for transgressing two prohibitions. As it is written, whoever lies with an animal shall be put to death. If the verse is not needed for the matter of one who engages in bestiality actively, as this prohibition is stated explicitly in the verse, and you shall not lie with an animal, apply it to the matter of one who engages in bestiality passively. And it is derived from the fact that the merciful one expresses the law of one who engages in bestiality passively, using the term for one who engages in bestiality actively. And just as with regard to one who engages in bestiality actively, the Torah both punishes for this act and prohibits it, so too, with regard to one who engages in bestiality passively, the Torah both punishes for this act and prohibits it. But with regard to one who unwittingly engages in intercourse with a male, and then unwittingly causes a male to engage in intercourse with him, and who unwittingly engages in intercourse with an animal, and then unwittingly causes an animal to engage in intercourse with him, performing all these actions in one lapse of awareness. In this case, both according to Rabbi Abahu and according to Abaye, the law, according to the opinion of Rabbi Yishmael, is that he is liable for transgressing three prohibitions, the ones mentioned above, and the prohibition of there shall not be a kadesh. Whereas, according to the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, he is liable for transgressing only two prohibitions. The sages taught, with regard to intercourse with a male, the Torah does not deem a younger boy to be like an older boy, but with regard to intercourse with an animal, the Torah does deem a young animal to be like an old animal. If a person has sex with an animal, it doesn't matter the age of the animal, he's violated this prohibition. Whereas a minor doesn't have the same liability as an adult. The Gemara asks, what does it mean that the Torah does not deem a younger boy to be like an older boy? Rav says it means that the Torah does not deem the intercourse of one who is less than 9 years old to be like the intercourse of one who is at least 9 years old. As for a male's act of intercourse to have the legal status of full-fledged intercourse, the minimum age is 9 years. So in other words, if God forbid, some kind of pedophile molests a young boy, so first of all, the law of the land is the law. So this guy is guilty of a terrible, terrible crime, and he should be punished for that. And our community would turn him in to the authorities. But under Torah law, there is going to be a distinction made with this age difference. That there's intercourse and there's molestation. And so beneath a certain age, it's not considered intercourse because it's outside of the definition of intercourse. Doesn't mean it's permitted. We're just talking about which crime and which transgression was committed, right? So likewise with a girl, a child, a girl who is raped, if that happens, she's below a certain age, then even if she was penetrated, she's still a virgin, right? Whereas if it happened after a certain age, then still the rapist is subject to the death penalty, but she would be considered not a virgin, right? So that's what the age difference really. That's the practical significance of it. The crime is still the crime, but which exact transgressions were committed vary according to the age of the minor. And what is the status, for example, did she become a non-virgin or not, also depends on the age at which this happened. The Gemara asks, with regard to what principle do Rav and Shmuel disagree in this matter? And the Gemara answers, Rav holds that any law that applies to one who engages in intercourse actively applies to one who engages in intercourse passively, and any law that does not apply to one who engages in intercourse actively does not apply to one who engages in it passively. Therefore, just as one who engages in intercourse actively is not liable if he is less than 9 years old, as the intercourse of such a child does not have the halakhic status of intercourse, so too, if a child who is less than 9 years old engages in homosexual intercourse passively, the one who engages in intercourse with him is not liable for violating this law. He's still a criminal, who can be brought to justice, but he didn't violate this law because that's not considered intercourse by this definition. And Shmuel holds, I'm almost done, questions or comments, get them in now. And Shmuel holds, it is written, and you shall not lie with a male as with a woman, indicating that the law of a male who engages in intercourse passively is like that of a woman, just as the intercourse of a woman has the halakhic status of intercourse from when she is 3 years old. The same is true with regard to a male who engages in intercourse passively. So consequently, in Shmuel's opinion, one who engages in intercourse with a male who is older than 3 is liable. It is taught in a baraisa in accordance with the opinion of Rav, one who engages in homosexual intercourse with a male who is aged 9 years and 1 day, or one who engages in intercourse with an animal, whether in a typical manner or in an atypical manner, i.e. anal intercourse, and similarly a woman who engages in intercourse with an animal, whether in a typical manner or in an atypical manner, all these cases the person is liable. And the baraisa sets the minimum age for the passive male at 9 years and 1 day. After that, still a crime, still a horrific transgression, but it would come under a different law. That's what I've got for us today. I'll take some questions. Reminder that this week we'll have class Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday, and then Nina and I will be traveling for the Atlanta Jewish Film Festival with our films When Do We Eat and Guns N' Moses. Anyone in the Atlanta area, we'd love to see you there. Tickets, I think, are still available, but you can just Google Atlanta Jewish Film Festival and catch us there. Okay, and that's why no class Thursday through Monday, and so we'll have class Tuesday and Wednesday this week, and then we'll resume next Tuesday. Okay, questions. Sharon, this linguistic dilemma of uncovering one's father's nakedness is a very challenging interpretation of Noah's son Ham when he comes upon his father drunk and naked, and the subsequent cursing of Ham and his descendants. Right. Very good, Sharon. That's why we would say that uncovering the nakedness doesn't refer to sleeping with his wife, but rather to some kind of act with him, right? And so that's why that seems to be the majority opinion. Very good reference. Lucy, it seems that both male homosexuality and bestiality were associated with the cult of Asherah, according to the Encyclopedia Britannica. In the Asherah cult, This was with the Asherah trees that they would worship, and a big part of their religious practice was orgies. Right? So, quote, in the Asherah cult, the Gedeshim priests had a reputation for homosexual practices, even as the Gedeshot priestesses for prostitution. So Israel eventually banned both the Gedeshim and Gedeshot, while in Ugarit, the Gedeshim and Kohanim were priestly guilds in equally good standing. Baal, another terrible form of idolatry that was involved in, Ahab and Jezebel in bringing their practices, and which was finally destroyed by Elijah, the prophet Elijah. Baal is portrayed in Ugaritic mythology as impregnating a heifer. Okay, so there you go, a human-like god who impregnates a cow in order to sire the young bull god, right? So there you go. So homosexuality and bestiality associated with the idolatrous practices of the surrounding nations and the nations that were destroyed or driven out because of their abominations and practices. That's what I've got for us today, and with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Tuesday, at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific. Have a great night.